Hello, it's Joseph, and welcome back to Colonizing Kerbin. This is episode 17, and it's technically a two-parter, or the second part of a two-part episode. And Franmore and Roffrey are two scientists at the Minmus mining outpost, or colony, have taken it upon themselves to do a little joyride. They decided to take out the rover that we landed with the base back in episode 15 and take it off to a mountain range about 5 or so kilometers away from the base facility. Now, we at the KSC did not tell them to do this mission. They decided to take it upon themselves, but they're on their own colony. They can make their own choices now. They're living their lives as they would like, and they, of course, are the two scientists of the facility, so they're going to want to go out and do some science. So this mountain is about 1 kilometer up, but rovers are not the most easy thing to control in Kerbal Space Program. So it was definitely a long journey. So they planted a flag here, and Franmore and Roffrey have become the first Kerbins to go up to the summit of a mountain on a world other than Kerbin. So in a second, you're going to see a good example of rovers. If you are not careful in Kerbal Space Program, I just allowed it to roll down the mountain, and we hit the sea at about 24 meters per second and went flying. So I went back to a quick save and tried to keep the speed of the rover between 3 to 5 meters per second. And then when I got a little closer to the sea, a little more like 1.5 meters per second. But boy, it took a long time to get this rover back. When I did that, I believe this whole journey was about 2 hours in the real world. But hey, it was Franmore and Roffrey had a fun time. They enjoyed it, and they collected some science, which we're eventually going to bring that science up to the orbital facility. All right, so now we're off to our next mission. And our next mission is going to introduce 3 more Kerbals to the Minmus outpost, or colony. And Theorder is the pilot for this craft, and Dottie and Gilbert are the 2 engineers that are going to be joining the colonists out at Minmus. And the craft that we are taking to Minmus is the refueling, or as I call it, a refuel tanker, I think. And I mentioned this in a previous episode. So in a second, here's the reveal. So we have the 2 large fuel tanks on the side. The craft does have its own fuel tank, and it comes with 4 engines that I mostly use. There's a Werner engine that I never really use. It might be a little overkill for a Minmus. I actually have a smaller mining craft that I had used previously in some games, in my sandbox game. And it works great for the Mun, but since Minmus has much lower gravity, as I mentioned in a previous episode, I believe it was last episode, I decided to build a larger one. So the upper stage is going to crash into Minmus. I just set an encounter and then turn the craft retrograde, hit the decoupler so that way it will be on a collision course with Minmus. And then I actually just use the RCS thrusters here on the tanker to realign the orbit so that it won't crash into Minmus. Now this craft is not going to go to the orbital station yet. We are going to align its orbit to the orbital station, but instead we're going to head straight down to the mining base on the surface. Now I came up with a little system to do that. As you can see, the periapsis marker is down to around 2,000 meters or 2 kilometers. And I fire the engines roughly, if you make the base like 6 o'clock on a clock, I fire the engines roughly around 11 o'clock. So that way the periapsis is to the east of the facility. There's a little alignment burn I have to do in the middle, but it actually seems to get me on a decent trajectory to land at the base. Now it's landing vertical, as you can see, so to bring it horizontal, I shift the fuel into the side tanks because there's some engines mounted on the side here. One of those engines is going to help push the nose forward. The reaction wheels will also help the nose go forward. And then I hit action group 4 to turn on these 4 little engines on the side to help cushion the landing, because those wheels have a low tolerance of impact and they could be damaged. So now it's horizontal and it can roll around to the side of the facility and dock with the facility to transfer fuel. However, that was when I discovered that despite all my efforts, the docking ports were just slightly misaligned. But thankfully, this facility has plenty of engineers, and the recent updates to Kerbal Space Program allows the engineers to make adjustments like this. So all I had to do was just slightly shift the docking port up, and now the docking ports are aligned, so we can go back to the tanker, move forward, and they are connected. So our two new Kerbins are going to switch out with two other Kerbins here in a second, and they're going to go up to the station. And the goal here is to fully fuel the station in orbit. And since those two tanks are the same tanks that are in orbit, it'll take about 4 trips to do this. 5 technically to fully fuel, because fuel is going to be wasted getting this craft into orbit. So just a reverse couple of steps to get it vertical. I don't necessarily have to put it in a vertical position because I could just go straight into orbit, but I think it looks good to do it this way. And since there's no atmosphere, we can pretty aggressively get into orbit. It doesn't take very much, and we are already getting a periapsis roughly around 50 kilometers, which is roughly around where the station is, and then just a small little alignment burn. And I actually was going to outrun the station, so I just fired a little bit more prograde and actually got an encounter. Probably would not do this in orbit of Kerbin or the Mun or Laythe or Duna or Jewel, but again, Minmus's gravity allows for these more aggressive maneuvers that would be big delta V wasters around other celestial bodies in the system. But that's part of the reason why we're doing all the mining here at Minmus. So a lot of this fuel is being able to dump into the station. And also, there are 2 large monopropellant tanks on the tanker. So I can also top off the monopropellant for the station and for the spacecraft. So when the space station and the craft docking with it use the RCS thrusters to align their docking, you know, they're of course using up monopropellant tanks. So this craft can also top those off. So now it's just rinse and repeat a few more times to refuel the station. So that kind of allows me to show you the process of returning to the surface of Minmus a few times. And it never gets old going through this process, at least until you get to the 3rd time. I will tell you though, this can be a very tedious process, all the mining. Now, since this mining facility is using the really large drills, large ore tanks, and it has 4 converter, it actually only takes roughly around a day and a half in the game, maybe 2 days worth of time in the game, which is really nice because the mining setup that we have back at the Mun is going to take several days to refuel the lander. So here's a small little demonstration of an emergency escape system I had set up. So the command pod has a few tanks on it and some small little engines, and it can easily, if the craft were to say suddenly explode or something, the craft can easily return back to the base. I have it set to the abort action groups, and on a PC, all you got to do is hit the delete button, and that will trigger the abort action group. And when it does that, you'll notice that there's these 4 flashing lights to denote that, hey, this is an emergency escape, and we, safely touched down back at the base. So even though this is a small craft, it has plenty of delta V around Minmus to get the craft to completely kill off the speed when we're on course towards orbit and return down to the base. Also, there is enough delta V that I can easily get into orbit. See, just a little puff right there, I am on an escape velocity out of Minmus's sphere of influence. And so I can easily get this craft into orbit of Minmus. I could probably even get this craft all the way back to Kerbin. However, it does not have a heat shield, so it wouldn't be able to do a re-entry. But it could at least dock with the station, and then the crew can be picked up and returned safely to Kerbin or to the surface of the base. We would just have to, you know, redo the craft. So you saw that little image there, Click. So there's this thing apparently on PC called sticky keys. So if this ever happens to you, just go to your settings and turn off the shift function. So whenever you're using the RCS pack on the Kerbals, shift raises them up, and it gets really annoying. You hit it 5 times, and all of a sudden that screen pops up, and it takes you out of the game. And most of the time it's not a big deal, but if I'm trying to precisely get a Kerbin to like grab on to a docking hatch or something, and then all of a sudden it goes to that screen, you know, then I have to go back to the game. And so yeah, I just kind of wanted to share that with you. Turn that off if you would. All right, so we brought up 2 of our scientists to the station. Actually, these 2 scientists are already up here at the station, and Fran Moore and Roffrey brought up some science with them that they collected with the rover, and we're going to bring this into one of the 2 labs that are up here on the refining station. And also the refining station, because of that lab, we can increase the experience of the Kerbals. So I brought up Roffrey and Franmore and Gilbert. Well, I'm going to bring up I believe I brought up a couple other engineers. Sorry, I can't recall who I brought up. You just look down in the bottom right corner and you'll see who I brought up. But basically, I'm able to increase the experience of the Kerbins. And that's a good thing for the engineers, because the more experience the engineers have, the more efficiently the fuel converters will run and the drills will run. So that can increase the speed at which we mine all this fuel even further. Well, while I was talking with you, I've actually kind of lost track of where we are on how many times we have gone up to the station. I believe we are on our 3rd. We're about to take our 3rd trip to the station. So here's another way to increase the experience of the Kerbins. I'm taking these 2 engineers up to the station now to increase their experience. And if they go out onto the surface of Minmus and plant a flag, that will increase the amount of experience points they gain. So that's part of the reason why in Kerbal Space Program, one of the big goals is to plant flags. And if you have Kerbal Experience on, planting a flag and then taking them to a science processing lab will allow you to increase their experience. So that's part of why we're doing that. I believe that was why earlier when I had the sticky key problem, the pilot for the tanker Theorder, whatever your name is, dude. When his RCS, he was out of the craft to plant a flag to increase his experience. All right, so this should be the final trip into orbit to fully fuel the refueling station. And this fuel could be necessary for us because as we plan to go to Duna and Laythe later on, we are going to need more Delta V. So one of the things I have in mind is that the craft, we could spend a lot of the fuel for the craft just getting them into low Kerbin orbit. And then they can be refueled in orbit. And we can do that 2 ways. And basically, you've already seen me do one way, just shoot a tank into orbit, dock it with the craft, and refuel it. Or we can go this route and refuel the craft. And I'm trying to give these colonies, you know, practical purposes. And the mining facility, of course, now has a practical purpose to refuel craft going into orbit. But how do we get that fuel to those craft? Well, that's where this comes in. So this was my original refuel, my tanker. However, I decided to just use the tanker that you've been seeing on screen for a little while and just add a few more tanks to it. And the reason for that is because the original tanker that you saw was using nuclear engines, and when I tested the craft previously, the nuclear engines work great when the tanks were empty, but when the tanks were really full, of course, the nuclear engines have such a low thrust to weight ratio. It just, meant that, we had to do more, longer burns with all that fuel in the tanks. So this craft's going to allow me to do transfer maneuvers a little bit faster in the real world. Ideally, you'd probably use the nuclear engines. It'd be more practical in the game's sense, to conserve fuel. However, there should be plenty of Delta V in the craft to move fuel from Minmus to the Mun and Minmus to Kerbin without using up a large amount of the fuel in the side tanks. Well, this is going to pretty much wrap up the episode now that we're bringing this transfer tanker to the orbital mining facility. So in our next episode, we're going to continue our efforts in preparation for colonizing Duna and Laythe. So thank you once again for watching this series, and I hope you've enjoyed this two-parter showing off our two bases and their functionality in the game. Have a wonderful day. See you next time.